Hello everyone, and welcome back to the 3T Path channel, and welcome back to our Uddhava-gita course. Now this is the 33rd class of our Uddhava-gita course, and if you want to watch the entire course, make sure you become a member of the channel, not just subscribe, but a member of the channel, and the instructions are here below in the description of the video. And now we're in a very exciting part, because Krishna is telling Uddhava a very concise description of the entirety of the spiritual path. Not only what to do, he's been telling us, but he's been telling us about the dangers of not doing it. So in the last class, we talked about the quote-unquote good dangers, which was to go to the Swarga planets and have a glowing spaceship and having fun and traveling in the pleasure gardens of the demigods. But that was also not a good thing, according to Krishna, because of course we are eternal souls. We want to go beyond samsara, not be stuck in some pleasant situation for a brief time and then, come back again, take another birth in human life. I mean, for all you know, you might have just done that. And so what good did that do you now that you're born again, here on earth? You just went there, you came back, and you're all confused and suffering here on earth again. So that's not so good. But today, he's going to get a little dark. He's going to talk about having a worse kind of deviation from material life, when things go down. So he's going to talk about going to hell in this verse we're going to start with. So quite exciting. Let's pay attention so we don't fall onto these traps. We can avoid these traps if we pay attention to Krishna. So here we are. We are in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th chapter. And now we're doing verses 27 through 29. They're all lumped together here as one paragraph. So Krishna says, if a human being is engaged in sinful, adharmic activities, either because of bad association or because of his failure to control his senses, then such a person will certainly develop a personality full of material desires. He thus becomes miserly towards others, greedy, and always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. When the mind is so polluted, one becomes violent and aggressive, and without the authority of Vedic injunctions, slaughters innocent animals for sense gratification. Does this sound familiar? Is any of this sounding familiar to you? Does anyone come to mind? I mean, it's just like, this is it, isn't it? This is our society in general. This is not one rare case. This is how people are conducting life these days, isn't it? So much violence towards women, so much greed, so much material desires, killing animals for pleasure, for the pleasure, just a brief pleasure of the tongue. They'll slaughter billions of animals being slaughtered all over the world. Of course, women are so abused, exploited all over the world. And Krishna is saying here what's going on is because they're engaged in sinful, adharmic activities, either by association or because of the failure to control the senses. So because of society is so corrupted, then you think it's normal to be corrupted. You get influenced. It's like everybody's doing it. I'm doing it too. It's just like, this is what we do. This is natural. It's natural to slaughter animals and destroy the planet in the process. That's what we do. It's perfectly natural. And you do that. And people exploit women. It's like, that's what we do. It's fun. It's interesting. Yeah, we do that. And then greedy, yeah, of course, we have to be greedy. This is our culture, to be greedy. So these things become normal, standardized because of association. So many people are doing it. More people do it. It's like a social contagion. Just like you can get viruses from people, you get these ideas. Culture comes from this, a social contagion. Well, you're doing it, I'm doing it too. Everybody's doing it. It's what we do. So because of association, and also because of our failure to control the senses. Nobody even talks about controlling the senses, right? This is a talk of different culture, yoga culture, control the senses. Our culture, indulge the senses, satisfy the senses. How can we satisfy them? You're encouraged to, take shelter of the senses. You're encouraged to surrender to your senses. It's like, do more, have more fun, do this thing. It's just, that's the culture. So our whole culture is geared towards this first part. I haven't finished, this is just the first part of the paragraph. So the whole culture is geared towards it, and that makes it then, but the result, we become miserly towards others, greedy, always anxious to exploit the bodies of women. And of course, violent and aggressive, and we kill animals for pleasure. But then Krishna goes on. Worshipping ghosts and spirits. Not so much of that going on today, but they did have that a lot in the past. The bewildered person falls fully into the grip of unauthorized activities and thus goes to hell, where he receives a material body infected by the darkest modes of nature. In such a degraded body, he unfortunately continues to perform inauspicious activities that greatly increase his future unhappiness. And therefore, he again accepts a similar material body. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death? Heavy, heavy paragraph from Krishna. So Krishna here described first a very common situation, as I said, people, degraded lives, violence, greed, exploitation, pretty much standard fare for human society these days. And of course the slaughtering of animals Krishna mentions. It's important that he mentions this because people forget about this a lot. But Krishna does not, because all creatures are his children. So he always talks about the welfare of all creatures. In Bhagavad-gita also, he's always talking about not just humans. Krishna never just talks about the humans. It's all creatures. That's how we should see it as well. We're all in this together. Not just humans, this, and then animals, different behavior. No, we have to treat everyone with love, with respect. We have to protect all creatures. So this is all going on standard, but then what happens is you start getting a little crazy. So the things you worship, here of course Krishna is talking about ghosts and spirits. Not so much of that in our modern culture. There is some of that, and some countries have a lot of that. But here we can understand also ghosts and spirits just worshiping like weird things. Worshipping things that don't elevate your mind. And that there's a lot of in this world. There is a lot of that. We worship, like a billionaire there. We worship some horrible person who turns out to be, a Nazi over there. And it's like we worship these people who are completely unqualified. We worship crazy people. People follow crazy people, conspiracy theorists, liars, people who betray their jobs, their oaths. People worship these people. This is happening all the time. This is like, I'm just talking about current affairs. I'm not talking about history. Just all these horrible people being worshipped. Politicians and musicians and billionaires. Horrible, despicable people. And you can see they're worshipped Millions of people thinking, oh, he's so amazing, he's so incredible. And they just worship them and everything they say. Oh yeah, look, he said this. This is worship. This is worship when you like think the person is amazing and everything they say, you're like, yes, this is worship. This is, it doesn't have to be like a worship, like you follow some ritual. It doesn't have to be like that. You're tracking them and you're following their every word, and they tweet 59 times a day and you're like reading every single tweet and you comment and you like. That's worship. That's worship as well. So people worship horrible things and then they get fully in the grip of unauthorized activities. This is exactly what's happening. People follow these behaviors, they follow and then they start doing it themselves and it's just a big disaster. And then what happens? Then he goes to hell. Krishna is just laying it out. He's like, look, this is what's going to happen. Of course, that's the concept of hell. Vedic hell, of course, is different from the Christian hell you might have heard of, which is completely insane. The idea of a permanent eternal hell is total insanity. To say that God would create a permanent eternal hell is like the topmost insane concept humanity has ever come up with. Topmost of all the crazy, horrible things we've come up with. That's the worst one. So that's not the kind of hell you have in the Vedas. In the Vedas, hell, there is actually a place called hell. And it's when you go to the movies, sometimes you go to there's a multiplex, right? And it's never just like in the old days, it's never just like one cinema, right? I don't think, do they even have that? I think they must have some of those. But anyway, mostly it's like there's all these different cinema rooms, right? It's multiplex, they call it. So it's like, which I'm going to, number 6, number 7, number 10. And there's like different, right? There's like all these 10 movies going on, being screened at the same time. So hell, Vedic hell, is like a hellish multiplex. And so the Bhagavatam here in the 5th canto, way before this section, talks about like over 100,000 different, screening rooms, as it were, 100,000 situation rooms, I don't know what you call it, like environments, over like 100,000 environments. Of course, all hellish, it's hell. So you have 100,000 different kind of like hellish experiences you can have. Not very nice at all. So depending on what you need to learn, like on the mistake you caused, on the harm you brought to others, depending on that, then there's a specific hell for you to experience the other side, a mirror to be put in front of you. Say, look, that was really bad what you did. You want to see how bad it is? Here, you try it. So for example, one that is actually mentioned, since we're in the topic of protecting animals and not eating animals for pleasure, one that is specifically mentioned in the Bhagavatam is where a person who boiled animals alive, people get lobsters and they put them alive in boiling water. They think this is a really good idea. Oh, it'll be nice and fresh like that. Nice. So then they go to hell, and then there's a special place there where you're dipped in boiling oil over and over again. And you can see how nice that is. So you're enjoying it now. And you're like, no, I'm not. Yeah, well, that's what you were doing. So now you just remember that. That creates a samskara, a lesson that's deep into your consciousness that you carry into your next lives, samskara. So the next life, you're like, no, let's not boil the lobster. I don't think that's a very good idea. Yeah. So they have these different hells for these. And then, after a while, you move on. So there's hell like that. And of course, there is hellish life, where you're degraded, you have this horrible, Krishna says, a body infected by the darkest modes of nature. Heavy stuff, heavy stuff. So you basically like a demon, kind of like a demonic thing, creature, just a horrible thing. You know, think about all the horror movies you've watched, you know, and the demons and the crazy, horrible, evil aliens, you know, that kind of like, just imagine like some horrible being. So then you get that kind of body, or you just, you know, there's horrible beings, of course, on earth, horrible people. So then you get that kind of body, because that's where you are, that's what your mentality is taking you to. So you're taken to that level. That's what happens. And Krishna describes this process also in Bhagavad-gita, where he says in chapter 16, where he talks about people with this kind of mentality, it's called asuric mentality. Asura. And he says, these people, they are thrown down to asuric lives. And then in that life, they, you know, they keep up this evil behavior, and they just keep getting birth and rebirth in these horrible lives, greatly increasing their future unhappiness. And people say, well, how can Krishna do that? Why is he throwing them in these horrible lives? Well, he's not throwing them exactly. This is what people are choosing. You know, you live what you choose. You know, you're choosing your life. You're in command. You know, but if you drive the car off the cliff, it will go off the cliff. It's not the car's fault. It's not the road's fault. It's not even the cliff's fault. But if you're driving the car and you choose to drive it off the cliff, you're going down. This is the way it works. We have free will. You can't complain about free will because you didn't like the result of it. Free will is about what you're doing. So complain about what you're doing, not about the result of what you did. Right? That's childish. Oh, I did this thing, but I don't like the result. Well, you know, tough luck. Be careful what you do. So you have free will. You can change what you are, but if you don't change, this is what Krishna is saying here, it's what he says in Bhagavad Gita. If you don't change, it's downward spiral. It's just a hellish downward spiral. It's just suffering, hellish body, hellish existence, bad behavior, more suffering. It just keeps going, and like just horrible, dragging you in pain, until you say, whoa, what the hell am I doing? And then you can change. Then you can, oh, maybe I shouldn't be eating animals. Maybe I shouldn't be exploiting women. Maybe I shouldn't be greedy and miserly. Maybe I shouldn't be engaged in sinful adharmic activities. Yes, maybe I should take shelter of God. Maybe I should correct my life and help others to do the same. Free will. And then you change your future. Very powerful, very important. And then Krishna just closes that powerful, powerful paragraph with a simple line. What possible happiness can there be for one who engages in activities inevitably terminating in death? So then he's like, what's the point? You know, what's the point of the whole glowing spaceship, pleasure cruise, going to hell? What is the point of all this? What's the point of doing anything if you're just heading towards death? If you don't have a plan B that doesn't have death as the final goal, what is the point of it all? What possible happiness can there be? Only a very crazy, foolish happiness. Can you imagine a person who's all like happy and they're going to die? Like, oh, it's great, I'm having a great time here. You're about to die. It's like, how can you be happy when you're about to die? It's like, you know, you're just not, it doesn't make sense. So plan B is Uddhava-gita. You know, Krishna comes and says, look, I got a good plan B for you. Like, your plan A isn't working. So this is plan B, you know. Let's have a spiritual life. Let's think about these things. Let's think about your eternal existence. Let's have a plan for transcendence. So you go beyond matter and thus beyond death, because death is ultimately a material thing. So let's have a plan to transcend death. And this is yoga. This is what we're doing here. Okay, purport. In the Vedic analysis of civilized life, there are two paths. One who takes to the path of Nivritti Marga immediately renounces material sense gratification and purifies his existence by the performance of tapas and devotional activities. On the path of Pavriti Marga, one furnishes a steady supply of sense objects to the senses, but one consumes such sense objects under strict regulations and through ritualistic ceremonies, thus gradually purifying the heart and satiating the material senses. So, this is the classic renunciant versus, they would call family life. This is like in classic language, it was like renunciant or family life. And they think that was, as if it were like, there's these two things you can do. Actually, if you understand Krishna's instructions, if you understand Bhagavad Gita, it's clearly not an issue. The issue is how you live. It's like I say, you have one layer of existence. Now you add the other layer of spiritual consciousness. So then what you're doing in your material layer, layer one doesn't matter as long as it's not crazy, as long as it's not violent and sinful, as long as it's dharmic. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if you're, naked in the forest as a renunciant or if you have a nice family life. It doesn't matter as long as it's dharmic. That's the thing. Not that many people understand this. Even in the past, people got confused with this because they would make a spiritual life something material by thinking, spiritual life is a material thing, so therefore I have material choices to make which will make my spiritual life. So if I have to, spiritual life must mean not this life, so I have to get rid of this life. So get rid of family and home and children. No, these things are mundane. So then I'm going to renounce them and try to be as much without contact with matter as possible, which doesn't make any sense anyway, because if you're still in matter, you're literally in matter. You're in a material body, in a material forest, in a material cave, eating material food and water. And it's the same thing. It's actually not that different. It's not that different. It doesn't really make any difference. So that's why Krishna never teaches that. Never is like, this is the way to go and this is different. No, it's like whatever your life, as long as it's dharmic. It's the quality of your life. Dharma is the key point. That's why Dharma is the first word. In the first verse of Bhagavad Gita, you have Dharma. In the last verse of Bhagavad Gita, you have Dharma. Dharma is the basis of spiritual life. People don't, it's a little subtle. So as long as it's dharmic, it doesn't matter. And plus, it's actually interesting, even in the Yoga Sutras, in the commentary, which was, written by Vyas, the Vyas commentary of the Yoga Sutras, which many academics think is Patanjali writing, but anyway, whatever. But in that commentary, in the Vyas commentary, the Vyas of the, whoever wrote it, because, it's Vyas, Patanjali. But they give a very important point. They say, look, tapas, when you perform tapas, these austerities, when you perform these renunciations, it's important not to agitate the mind, because the point we want is a stable, peaceful mind. That's what you want. You want a stable, peaceful mind so that you can then go into contemplation, prayer, meditation, connection with God, mental clarity. So we want a peaceful mind. Now, how can you agitate your mind? You can agitate your mind in two different ways. You can agitate it by just having lots of junk. Like you're just reading junk. You're doom scrolling, and you're just watching nonsense. And so you can agitate your mind with gossip, just imbuing lots of trash into your mind, so your mind's all agitated. And of course, bad foods as well, alcohol, drugs, so your mind's just a big mess. It's a toxic, it's a waste dump. it's a mess. So that's one way. But also you can agitate your mind by, for example, practicing too much renunciation. There's no point like, oh, I'm going to do a vow of silence. I won't talk, you won't physically talk, but your mind is like blah, 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 and you're like breathing. That won't help. I mean, the whole point of silence, it was silence in here that matters, not actually closing your mouth. That's not, so, and then he says, for example, what if you're doing, oh, I'm going to fast. But then all you're thinking about is food and you're so disturbed that you're not eating. Your mind is like, oh my God, would you please eat? Please, food. Oh my God, I want food so badly. So then your mind is so agitated thinking about eating, that fast is completely useless. It's actually bad for you. It'd be better, as they say here, if you just ate nicely. Just have a good meal. Don't eat crazy. Just have a nice prasada meal. That's great. Krishna actually will say later that a handful of prasad is worth 6 months of fasting in terms of benefits. So, just eat regularly. So again, dharma. Just do the dharmic thing. And if you do the dharma, if you stick to dharma and the way you eat, talk, deal with others, conduct your life, work, your mind is steady. You have a beautiful base layer on which to then add spiritual consciousness. In your spiritual practices, you have a beautiful, perfect foundation. And this is what Krishna teaches. Uddhava isn't a renunciant. He was a palace minister with family. Krishna teaches Arjuna. Arjuna wasn't a renunciant. Arjuna wanted to renounce everything. And Krishna says, no, you can't. Arjuna was the prince of the empire. He had infinite wealth. He had more than one wife. He had palaces and chariots and golden ornaments but he was dharmic. Uddhava, of course, perfectly dharmic. So beautiful base layer on which you can then add yoga, spiritual practice. So anyway, this idea of nivritti marg, poverty marg is actually a bit confusing and not to the point. In these words, the words sangat asatam vajitendriya are very significant. One may fall down into sinful life by bad association, or even in good association, one may fail to control his senses. Ultimately, each living entity is responsible for his existential situation. The word adharma rata in this verse indicates that those engaged in excessive sex life, meat eating, drinking, and other inauspicious activities that transgress the codes of civilized human life. Being in the mode of ignorance, these persons develop such a cruel mentality that they do not consider any festive occasion complete without the consumption of large quantities of meat obtained by slaughtering helpless animals. Eventually, such persons become influenced by ghosts and spirits who deprive them of all ability to discriminate between right and wrong. Losing all sense of decency, they become fit candidates for entrance into the darkest modes of material existence. Sometimes these lusty, intoxicated carnivores consider themselves pious prey to God in a useless way. Afflicted by innumerable material desires, they rotate from one material body to another without experiencing true happiness. It's great, isn't it? Very heavy commentary. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is a spiritual master in our lineage from the 19th century, has noted that material life is so disturbing that even if one is allowed to live for an entire day of Brahma, approximately 8,640,000,000 years, one will eventually be afflicted by the fear of death. In fact, Brahma himself is disturbed by fear of death, what to speak of tiny human beings who live a paltry 70 or 80 years at most. Thus, as stated here, Kim Sukham Martya Dharmina. What possible happiness can one find within the painful grip of material illusion? Really good stuff, isn't it? So we'll end here. It's a beautiful, powerful paragraph. It's amazing commentary with it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please share it if you enjoyed it. It helps bring people to this course. And have a wonderful day with lots of peace and lots of love. Hare Krishna.